A lot of what I'm experiencing right now is reminding me so much of when my daughter was pregnant. And if you were not with us on the channel at that time, my daughter was being told at the time she was consulting with medicine, though since that time she no longer goes to medicine at all. And as you know, I completely came out of medicine years ago. But they were claiming that the baby was the baby was in distress, that the baby was in danger, they needed to go in and take the baby, that the baby might die, that she might die. But they were doing a lot of like very shady things, and my daughter was not feeling like she trusted them. And you can go back and listen to those videos on this channel of God pulling her out of this reliance on this field that denies him, that sets up a bunch of idols that claim that they're going to heal you and covet, things like births, and then play on the desperation of a woman who's in labor in order to get you to get other expensive procedures that insurance will pay for, like cesareans. By that time, my daughter had already seen what medicine had done to me, and she also got her doctorate within the field of healthcare and saw the way that they were trained as students to meet monetary quotas. A monetary quota should never be the basis by which you're performing procedures or giving treatments. There's something called medical necessity criteria that is supposed to be met. But when she tried to address this issue with other professionals within the field, they said, well, we have loans that we have to pay back. That I'm not even kidding you. She was trying to consult with others in the field because her training institution said to her that she had to meet a monetary quota. She was not comfortable with it. She was not comfortable doing procedures on patients based on a monetary quota, though her colleagues seemed very comfortable with it. You should know that the majority of people don't even question what they're being told to do. Don't we know years later that that's like what the Nazis said, that they said we're just following orders? And yet this is the culture, this is the society that we live in. These are the training institutions that train up the doctors that we go to and place our lives and the lives of our families in. And you need to know that this is what was going on. That she tried to notify other professionals and to consult with them about what to do. And they said, this is the standard in the industry. We all have loans to pay back. No one was alarmed that a doctor might be taking out something that belonged in your body or altering your body in some way. No one was alarmed by that. Like that was not sacred to them because they have loans to pay back. That's outrageous. I've shared with you some of the things that I saw in the field of healthcare. Yes, I was a psychologist, and most psychologists don't work in medical settings. I so happen to work in medical settings in part because I did that during my training, but also because I had a particular niche in which I was in medical settings, as well as private practice. And I've shared with you on other videos that I saw people and reported facilities for stealing from people, manipulating patients into giving money for special treatment. I witnessed people being chemically restrained. Let me tell you what that is. Men hold down the limbs of a patient and shoot them up if they're not being cooperative, and they keep that patient cooperative. That's illegal. And if a patient did not want to leave the hospital, for example, if you had a homeless patient who during the rainy season or excessive heat or something like that, they found themselves in the psych hospital, they were resourceful enough to get themselves there. What they would do is they would shoot up that patient, throw them in the back of a taxi, and pay with instructions to the taxi driver to drive them to very dangerous neighborhoods and kick them out of the taxi. And how would you get them out of the taxi, you ask? Well, they're sedated. What do you think is going to happen to someone like that who's dumped in a dangerous neighborhood? You don't think that person's going to be trafficked, robbed, hurt? This isn't necessarily the topic of the video, but I just want you guys to know these things. God had to do a lot to get me out of that field, to open my eyes to the evils that occur within the field of within the sciences, particularly the quote unquote helping professions. These are not helping professions and they're not helping professionals. The only thing that they're helping is themselves to your money. And they will discard you just as quick as you don't have anything to give them. This is a field that denies Christ. It sets up idols. Jesus said that he is the one who heals us. I am the Lord, your healer. Exodus 15:26. If we don't believe that, then we're handed over to this. And I was, for 7 years, extremely sick and handed myself over to that. I had great wealth at the time. I had the ability to pay for any kind of treatment, any kind of doctor, whatever it was. I mean, you would not believe some of the things that I came across. First of all, I have had surgeries that didn't need to be done. A doctor who installed a mesh claiming that I had a hernia, which I never had. And the report states it. He opened me up. There was no hernia. He installed a mesh. Why? Why was that not even a conversation? Like, if we open you up and there's no hernia, what would you like us to do? Would you like us to put a foreign object in you? I had another surgery in which I was filling up with fluid and I was bound. And then one of the other times that I went in to go consult with the doctor said, whatever you do, don't bind yourself. And he had a witness there. Isn't that interesting? Like, he was the one who told me to bind myself in order to hold the fluid in a particular place. And then later told me, whatever you do, don't bind yourself. These people don't care. And they don't know what they're doing. They don't have the ability to heal. I went to another doctor who claimed that she was going to get to the bottom of what was going on with me, and she couldn't. And so at some point, like, there wasn't even a conversation of like, well, I'm just going to give up now. She just discontinued the conversation. Because as long as I was going over there 2 days a week to get IVs to sustain my body because I couldn't eat, she was making her money. Because everyone that walks into those offices is just a cash cow anyway. Why'd God hand me over to all that? Because those are idols. And he had to show me that it didn't matter how much money I had. He was not going to allow anybody to heal me. He was not going to reward my efforts to set up an idol before him. I'll tell you one more story. I was desperate. I was dying. And I called a doctor's office in Beverly Hills because supposedly this doctor dealt with gut health and, stuff like this. I think at the time I probably had been diagnosed with like SIBO. It was like the diagnosis of the week. Oh, it's got to be this, got to be this, got to be small intestinal bacterial growth. All right, well, let me go to this doctor. And I called and they said, well, he's about 3 months out, but if you pay a VIP price of $1,500, he could see you in 2 weeks. What is that, guys? That is so disgusting. I could not believe what I was hearing, or that that's even legal. Like, I don't even know if that is legal, but it was just so sick to me. Oh, so you have the time. You just need people to pay a VIP premium in order to be seen. That's so sick. I'm telling you, the fruit of this field is not good. It is not good. The field of medicine, the sciences, they have coveted and usurped God's power and glory. Here's what I actually want to talk with you about. As I have been going through this thing that I've been talking with you about, I gave up everything. I gave up my 3 businesses. I gave up wealth. I gave up my career. I gave all of my things away in order to become very, very low. Lived on my life savings, lived on my retirement. And I thought that this building that I own, actually, I thought that building, when I sell that building, it's going to pay for the rest of the time that I have here. And then God told me not to sell the building. He wasn't done with it. And that building has been empty largely since I purchased it. Because what God has been teaching me with that building is how to raise his people, how to care for his house. And so that building was a disaster when I purchased it. I remodeled it with him, not making any decision without him. And that was important because why is that important? Because you don't make any decision without him when you're taking care of his house, his people. He was teaching me how to stay in step with him. He was teaching me how to cleanse out the paganism, like the books that I brought, the 2 bookshelves of books that I had narrowed things down to of like, this is knowledge. And eventually he had me throw out all of those books, all of my assessment materials for the niche that I had, thousands and thousands of dollars. But I mean, what are you going to do with that? You're going to give away something that represents falsehood? No, it went in the dumpster. because I'm not going to sell out to something that is fleeting, that's temporary. When I bought that building, I still had things like crystals and a Tibetan sound bath and salt lamps. The logo on one of my business cards had a lotus on it, which is like, a lotus and like those stacked rocks that represent some sort of Eastern spirituality. I was very confused. Like, I didn't know what any of these things did or meant, or, I mean, obviously they don't do anything, but I didn't understand, like, the symbolism behind them, because he had to clean this stuff out of me. And these are all things that have happened since I've been at that building, since I've had that building. And he's used it as a metaphor. And I've talked about it in Heart Known series. I've written stories about it in Heart Known series. And so when it came time for me to sell that building, he cleaned out one more thing, which was a person who was living there, maintaining the grounds. He cleaned that person out, and that's it. And he has said things to me like, if I want this place empty, then that's my prerogative, because no one is going to be in this house who is defiled. He taught me, because I had staff go in there initially, and he taught me to get rid of those staff. They did not belong in that house. This other person who had claimed that they wanted to be in ministry was not living according to God's ways, and they had to go. And is that not the same? Is that not the predicament in God's house? What did he say to, Abraham? God didn't like move the marker of what it is that he requires, or the standard of what he requires with Abraham in, Sodom. You might hear my dog snoring in the background. That's all that is. It's just my dog right next to me snoring. What did he say to Abraham? Okay, so Abraham said, well, if I can find 10 people, if I can find 10 righteous people, will you spare the city? And God agreed that he would spare the city. If I can't find one righteous person to occupy that house, it'll remain empty. It'll remain empty. That's what he's taught me. Now, when it came time to sell the property, at least according to my understanding, because it wasn't necessarily because God told me to sell the property, it was because I thought, well, this is all I have left. I mean, how else am I going to be able to live? All I have is the equity that I have in these properties. And there was no reason for me to hang on to that building, because I had learned what he set out to teach me. But then he started convicting me that he wasn't done with the building, and that he was continuing to teach me and continuing to speak through the building, and that he would continue to take care of the building. And he's done that. I mean, to be honest, even the inside of the building, I go there to clean up the grounds and stuff like that. Even the inside of the building is like, it's spotless. I hardly ever need to dust or do anything like that. I go over there and I sit with him and I cry out to him. And I wait for him to talk with me about what he wants to talk with me about while I'm there. How does he want to use this metaphor? So he let me know that he was not done with the building, that he would continue to use it. Okay, so now I'm in a position where I can't afford either property, and I'm just waiting for him to do something. Okay, so what is it that you want to do? Now, you might think this is weird, but read the book of Jeremiah. Do you remember that Jeremiah purchased a field? He purchased his cousin's field in the middle of Nebuchadnezzar or Babylon laying siege to Jerusalem. And God told him to purchase that field. And he said, you're telling me that Babylon is laying siege to Jerusalem, and yet you tell me to go buy this field. And then God explains the symbolism of why he has him purchase that field. Well, like, what is Jeremiah supposed to do with that field that is now in the possession, or soon to be in the possession, of Nebuchadnezzar? Why would God have him do that? So you might think this is weird, but God's been known to do some real weird things. Our job is just to make sure that we're hearing right. So look, I am in a position now where I'm in foreclosure on my house. I don't think so yet on the building, but I'm on my way there. I'm still waiting for God to do something. I still believe there's no way that I've given everything up, and that I have been given understanding and wisdom that I don't hear anyone else talking about. There's no way that I gave up my field, gave up my doctorate. My daughter as well gave up her field and her doctorate, and God's going to deceive me. He's going to trick me. So I'm here and I'm trying to understand what it is that I need to do on a daily basis in order to move my heart where God wants me to move my heart, because he's not going to relent until the lesson's been learned. He already know that. He's taught me that from the very beginning. And I'm finding myself journaling out a lot of what we were going through when my daughter was pregnant. A lot of that process, I mean, it's been very, very similar. When you're pushed up against the wall and you're wondering, like, is God really going to require me to sacrifice my firstborn in order to not go to these idols? And at the time, we thought, like, how do you have a non-medicalized birth? How are we going to do this? And right up to the very end, my daughter was like, well, I mean, if I really have to go, then I'm going to go. And she prayed and she asked God to make it so that she couldn't go if he didn't want her to go. And her contractions for 10 and a half hours remained so close together from the very beginning, like a minute apart from the very beginning. It was terrible. But she couldn't have gotten down those stairs to go to the hospital, and she said so. Like, there's no way that I'm going to go to the hospital. She had that baby at home. We delivered that baby, her husband and I. But leading up to all of that was torment. It was torment. And I have that documented here on the channel. You can hear it. I was in utter torment every single day because, like as a parent, if you're a parent, then you can understand this, that as a parent, if you're going through something, it's totally different. But if you see your child going through something, it is torture. It might be hard going through it personally, but to not be able to feel the pain of your child going through this and not be able to do anything for them is torment. And she would call me and she would just be in absolute hysterics. He hasn't moved for the last hour. I mean, I drove all the way out there, laid hands on her stomach, and that night he moved more than he had ever moved before, she said. So my mind has been brought back to, what was I doing during that time? How do I need to stand? And one of the things that I sat down and set out to do is to just turn my heart to to God's heart. And to ask him, help me to understand how to turn my heart towards your heart. Help me to understand what it is that you require of me right now. Because at the end of the day, you can do whatever you want. And there is nothing I can do to change what it is that you have planned. But I know that I will be okay if I have the heart that you require. I know that I'll be able to make it through. But if I don't do it, I will not be able to stand. If I do not rend my heart to what your heart desires from me, I will not be able to stand. I know that God is glorified in our weakness. I know that the Israelites, when they were up against the sea with the Egyptians chasing them in chariots and they're on foot, that there is no way that they could have seen it coming, that God was going to part the sea for them. And not only give them a highway by which to travel, but to close up the sea and snuff out their enemies like a wick. Didn't see that coming. God can't not be faithful. It's just more about us being able to rend our hearts and wrap our hearts around what he's doing and what his ways are. When God first started drawing me to himself, I remember that I used to listen to all kinds of really terrible people, like Jonathan Cahn. And I remember that Jonathan Cahn would always start out sermons with the prayer of, in my weakness, be glorified. It was such an empty thing that he was saying. What do you mean, in your weakness? Tell us about your weakness. Tell us about your thorn. Tell us about the persecution. Tell us about the weakness, because there was weakness in which Paul was being constantly pursued and persecuted. He also talked about some sort of an illness or affliction that he was experiencing when I don't remember what group of people it was that he had met under those circumstances. And I have a feeling that it was affliction, not illness, because God uses affliction with the people that he's using. By the time you are suffering with illness, it's because you have not been returning to him. But he will use affliction as a thorn. David had that. Pain in his bones. Every day brings new punishment. I mean, David had a lot going on. Jesus was glorified. What happened when Jesus said, "Glorify your name, Father"? And the Father responded to him, "I have glorified my name and I will do so again." What was he referring to? The crucifixion. He was referring to Jesus being killed. That through this terrible suffering that Jesus went through, that he would end up being glorified. It's going to be in our desperation. It's going to be in our total powerlessness. And in fact, Daniel 12 tells us that all of these things, in the great tribulation are going to go on until the power of God's holy people has been broken. Why is that necessary? Because God is glorified, and because you're being tested to see if you're going to stand in those moments that are so desperate and so crazy to the world. I mean, you can't imagine the thoughts that have gone in my mind. Am I like the biggest idiot in the world to have gone from poverty to wealth to making a choice to go to poverty again? Am I the biggest idiot in the world? A career that I spent years building to the point that I was semi-retired, like I didn't even need to go into work, which was kind of a good thing because I was very sick. I gave that all up. I mean, my financial planner, my CPA, they would be like dumbfounded at what I've done. And the crazy thing is that the people who have like eaten at my table have dropped off like flies. Like they're nowhere to be found. Same thing that happened with Jesus as well. Paul talked about these kinds of things happening to him. Everybody fled in his hour of need, like the last minute where he's being arrested. Everybody fled. And he prophesied it. You're all going to fall away. This very night, you're all going to fall away. And you can see on the road to Emaus, they still didn't understand. What are these empty words that Jonathan Cahn was praying? In my weakness be glorified? What are you talking about? You have a scripted speech. We need to get real, guys. This is what I'm talking about. I'm sharing my testimony of weakness with you. I'm sharing my testimony of my power being broken, of being low for the glory of God. And even though I can't see what it is that he's going to do, and even though it's humiliating for me to get on here and tell you what I'm standing in right now, I have set my comfort, my rights to privacy, my right to save face. I've set it aside to be an offering to you so that you can hear and know and understand that this is what God requires. This is the faith that God requires. And that if I can do it when no one else is doing it, you can do it during the Antichrist reign when so many others will be doing it as well. I don't know anyone who's done this. I thank God so much that I have a daughter who is standing with me, because those who were eating from my offering for the last 3 years, they're nowhere to be found. Where are they? They can't even stand in their own covenant. How are they going to drink the cup that Jesus drank, that the apostles drank, that I'm now drinking? How are they going to do that if they're shaken by the simplest things? How are they going to do that if they don't even care about their shepherd? They don't care about the rest of the body to feel obligated to stand with the rest of the body. How can you be in the body if you don't stand with the body? That doesn't make any sense, does it? It's so unfortunate and sickening to me that people don't feel an obligation. Like I feel an obligation every single day to be built for you. Every day I feel that obligation. Why doesn't anyone else feel that? What's wrong? What is wrong in the hearts of those claiming to belong to God? You see brothers and sisters in need, you don't help them. You hear the suffering of other people, you don't share your testimony. You don't trudge. You don't share. What's wrong? One of the things I did when my daughter was pregnant and I was losing my mind and going absolute bananas trying to stand every single day, it was like every day I knew I needed to stand in faith. It wasn't enough to just, wait, which I see so many people doing, and I don't know what you're waiting for. It's like, God doesn't bring grief willingly. You're not going to stay here longer than you need to. If you're still here, it's because you're still working something out. If he's holding up on something, it's because there's something that you need to do in the interim. So many people think that what we're supposed to be doing is just waiting out time because eventually God's going to do X, Y, Z. Yeah, eventually he's going to do X, Y, Z, but if you didn't learn the lessons along the way, something else is going to have to be brought on you in order to learn those lessons. Like, do we get that? And so while she was going through this and we were waiting because she was like 100 weeks pregnant, I mean, she was told by her doctor, if you go to 42 weeks, that's a high risk pregnancy and we need to go in and take the baby. I don't even know why this was a conversation, because if you haven't gone to 42 weeks, then why do you even need to have this conversation? Have it later. To me, that tells me that they were already gearing up for that. And actually, 42 weeks is not a high risk pregnancy. 42 weeks is actually pretty normal for women to go that far. But we didn't know because we were so used to deferring to medicine to tell us what the truth is. Well, she told me, after hearing that from her doctor, before God fully brought her out, she said to me, this is what my doctor said, and I feel that God is going to make me go to 42 weeks. She went to 42 weeks and 1 day. She had him 42 weeks and 1 day later. Because, why? Because God's going to be glorified. We were just so broken and so scared, but standing in faith. I mean, there were nights when she couldn't sleep and she would just get up and go into the living room and cry and pray and read the word, sometimes call me. It was so hard. And I would do videos and I would cry on the videos. And I did a series on faith and I would just read about faith and I would just try to rend my heart into that faith. Okay, I'm going to stand just like this. And then, I'd read it. I'd be hysterical in the beginning and then I'd read it and okay, I'm working my heart into it. I'm working my heart into understanding what Abraham did, what the Israelites did, what Moses did. I'm working my heart into this. I went to every single story that I think it's Hebrews 9 where he talks about that. I might be wrong, or 11. But he talks about, he lists out the stories of faith. And so I went to each one of those stories and read about it. And as I would read, I wasn't just reading so that I could carnally adapt my brain into faith, because that's not where you're going to be justified, is it? But I would read it and I would stay attuned to the Holy Spirit. And I would ask him, change my heart. And I would rend my heart. Okay, what would it be like to be in this situation? Okay, what are the similarities with my situation? What is it that I need to do? How do I need to bend? These are the ways of God. These are not the ways of the world. I need not lean on my own understanding. This is what I'm going to do. And so I was doing that this evening. I continued to do that and just really try to make every single day count. Reminding myself, I have a list of things that God has done in my life, in my daughter's life, things that he's revealed that I could have never. I mean, come on, how am I going to reveal these things to myself? The fact that the things that he's told me that I'm doing, the things that will happen, have completely lined up with the timeline of what's going on. I couldn't have predicted what was going to happen 3 years later. So I'm reminding myself, I'm standing in faith, and he's not doing this work for me, and he's not going to do it for you either. This is the work that we're required to do. So if he's not answering, a lot of the time, the reason he's not answering is either we haven't done the work that we need to do, or he's requiring us to stand in faith. And I think that's, the reason I say or is because obviously there's still work that needs to be done. So it may not be that I didn't do the work that I needed to do today, but maybe there are more days that need to occur in which I'm doing this work. A lot of the questions that we were asking during her pregnancy, when we were so beside ourselves over what we were going to do, is would he be faithful? Would he require us to sacrifice this firstborn son, this firstborn grandson? Is that what he was going to do? Was he going to break our faith? Was he going to break our confidence in him? And when he came and he was healthy and has continued to be so healthy and such an incredible joy to us and such a happy boy who knows that he's loved, God broke that stronghold of medicine off of us. Now we look back and we're like, medicalized birth, like what is that? Why would anyone ever do that? And God's been delivering babies for thousands of years. But when I look at what he's done with my grandson and the relationship that he has taught my daughter to have with my grandson, which is the most beautiful mother-child relationship I think I've ever seen in my life. Well, I know that I've ever seen in my life. It is so beautiful, their bond. And he's given her wisdom and understanding about how to raise him in ways that she was not raised by me in those ways. She was not raised in a godly home. I didn't know Jesus at that time. So where would she get that wisdom? I did the best I could with what I had. But even the good things that I was doing, like taking my daughter, the supposedly good things, like decorating the Christmas tree and taking her to, Starbucks and getting her a hot chocolate for mommy-daughter dates. Why? Why would you feed your kid caffeine, get them all caffeinated up, and then go do flesh-based activities? Lead them to a pagan holiday. Let's decorate the Christmas tree. We'll just stand all around this idol. Anyway, I think about the things that God has done and how he's been glorified through this little baby boy. How he's completely changed our lives through him. How in the midst of all of this negativity and all of these things that medicine was speaking and predicting in their crystal ball, God defied all of it. 42 weeks and 1 day, that should paint a picture for you of what it was that he was doing. He was being glorified. He will have the last word. He is God. And we chose him all the way through that entire experience. We chose him. We stood. We cried. We broke. We reminded ourselves. I mean, I remember driving out when my daughter called and was hysterical and said that Jeremiah hadn't moved for I think it was 2 hours or something like that. I was in my car and I was reminding myself, screaming in my car, reminding myself of the story of the Israelites and what God did for them. And I was saying, no, you're the God who does this, and you do this, and you did this, and you're gonna fulfill this. There's no way that you cannot. There's no way that you will break our faith. There's no way that you're gonna bring judgment on us. And by the way, in the Bible, stillbirths, miscarriages, these were brought in judgment. I'm sorry if that's happened to you. It's happened in my family as well. And I understand that it's deeply painful, but that's brought in judgment. If you believe in the Bible, then you'll take a look at the things that God has sent in your life and you'll understand it for what it is. It doesn't mean that you're condemned. It means that God has brought judgment and that you need to return to him. So I look at my situation right now. I've stood. I've chosen him. When I could have sold that building, I stayed with him. And I asked him if he wanted me to sell it. And I asked him to please be faithful and make sure that he was going to take care of me. So now I'm in foreclosure. Does that mean he's been unfaithful? Well, these are some of the questions that I have to answer. These are some of the questions that I think that, people who've been in the body or been on this channel, that you need to answer. I tell you to discern who I am and what I'm doing every single time I upload a video. Every single time I ask you to do that. These are questions you need to answer. If God is not faithful, if God destroys me, if the things that I have heard from him are not true, then there's judgment. Then what he's doing is bringing judgment. I'm not going to be disillusioned about that or paint a different picture about what that is, because I believe in what the word says and I don't make up stories in order to fit my own narrative. I rend my heart to what his story is. What is my understanding at the end of the day? We trusted and believed, but we also cried out to him and begged him to do something. I read about faith. I stood. I shared my testimony, even when it was scary to do so. Let me tell you something. It doesn't feel good to share my testimony right now because he hasn't fulfilled. It's different when you're sharing your testimony and he's already fulfilled, and then you can kind of say things in hindsight. Right now, I have to feel all of the stupid feelings or the feelings of feeling stupid. And then I have to remind myself, wait a minute, God tells us to do weird things. God also is going to show us what we've been given. He's going to make sure that we know what we've been given. And how will you know what you've been given? The best way to know what you've been given is to go through what Jesus had to go through, or at least parts of what he had to go through. Now, do you remember that when the mother brought the two sons to Jesus and she said, I want this one at your left and this one at your right? And he said, are you ready to drink the cup from which I'm drinking? And they said, yes. And he said, well, it's not for me to decide where you sit, basically. That's the Father's decision. But you will indeed drink from the cup I'm going to drink from. So I'm not telling you something that is not biblical. You may have chosen to believe it in a different kind of way. You may have chosen to interpret that in a different kind of way. But the rest of the Bible tells you that you're going to die for him. The very people who kill you are going to claim to be doing a service to God. Don't fear those who kill the body, but fear the one who kills both soul and body in hell. You're going to drink from the cup that I'm drinking from? I mean, what else do you need? Peter telling him, I'm ready to die for you? What does that mean? What do you mean you're ready to die for him? Unless, you're gonna. Paul saying you haven't yet resisted sin to the point of shedding your own blood. Revelation 6, in the 5th seal, when the souls who've been beheaded, the martyrs, are seen under the altar, which is Christ, by the way. And they're saying, how long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood? And they're told, wait a little longer until the full number of your brothers and sisters, the servants of our God, have been killed just as you have been. Oh, in that scenario, everybody's been killed. Revelation 20, verse 4. John sees those who have gone up in the first resurrection as those who've been given authority to judge and have been beheaded because of the word of God. So I don't know what we've been listening to, but this is what the word says. We're going to know what we've been given. And so we're going to experience the things that Jesus experienced. We're going to experience the betrayal. Just so happens that Paul talked a lot about that. David talked about it. The betrayal of those who are closest to us. I did a video last night on strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered, talking about, being at your lowest and people scattering, people not being able to stand. That's what happened to Jesus. I don't know if you can imagine how hard that is when you're at your lowest and these people who have claimed to be your friends can't even stand in their own covenant right now and do the most basic things like take care of their house, their kids, and obey basic commands like observe the Sabbath. Don't go out and work on the Sabbath. You can't stand in that. How do you think that you're going to stand in the things that are going to happen during the Antichrist reign? The word says we're being purified, made spotless, and refined. That's the process of making gold. So when the gold is put in the fire and it's melted, the impurities separate from it. But if you're like, no, I want to hold on to those impurities, just one or two, you're not going to make it. How can you? I've been reading Isaiah 7 for weeks now. God has put this on my heart. Also, Habakkuk, Jeremiah 15. I mean, he's put a lot of different scriptures, Psalm 91. But Isaiah 7, he keeps bringing me back to, and he keeps bringing me back to this statement that if you don't stand in faith, you will not stand at all. So let me tell you the situation. Ahaz, remember that the kingdom of Israel had been split in two through Rehoboam, Solomon's son. And this is because of the disobedience of Solomon, but in order to maintain God's promise to David, he decided to do it through Solomon's son instead of doing it through Solomon. And so the kingdom split, and you have Israel in the north and Judah in the south. So Judah is like this little kingdom. The rest of Israel contains the other 11 tribes. And it says, when Ahaz, son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, was king of Judah, King Rezin of Aram and Pekah, son of Remaliah, king of Israel, marched up to fight against Jerusalem, but they could not overpower it. Now the house of David was told, Aram has allied itself with Ephraim. So the hearts of Ahaz and his people were shaken as the trees of the forest are shaken by the wind. That's descriptive. Let's read it again. So the hearts of Ahaz and his people were shaken as the trees of the forest are shaken by the wind. They're afraid. They're going to be overtaken. That's a very descriptive line. Then the Lord said to Isaiah, go out, you and your son Shear-Jashub, to meet Ahaz at the end of the aqueduct of the upper pool on the road to the launderer's field. Okay, let me just tell you something. Shear-Jashub means a remnant will return. You think this might be symbolic? Something that Ahaz is living through, but it's also something that is symbolic for us right now. So go out, you and your son Shear-Jashub, to meet Ahaz at the end of the aqueduct of the upper pool on the road to the launderer's field. Say to him, be careful, keep calm, and don't be afraid. Do not lose heart because of these two smoldering stubs of firewood. That's how he describes the kings of Israel. Because of the fierce anger of Rezin and Aram and the son of Remaliah. Aram, Ephraim, and Remaliah's son have plotted your ruin, saying, let us invade Judah. Let us tear it apart and divide it among ourselves, and make the son of Tabeel king over it. Yet this is what the sovereign Lord says. It will not take place. Okay, so people can come against you, and they can have a lot of power, and you can be a tiny little kingdom. But here's what the Lord says. For his remnant, it will not take place. It will not happen. For the head of Aram is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is only Rezin. Within 65 years, Ephraim will be too shattered to be a people. The head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is only Remaliah's son. If you do not stand firm in your faith, you will not stand at all. If God has promised you something, or if you've given everything to God in good faith, I'm talking about you really gave everything to God and you did it with him and you didn't do it of your own understanding. Because I didn't just make a series of bad decisions or something. These are decisions that I made with God. These are decisions that I didn't want to make, that I obeyed with him. If you do that, and truly in your heart, you are receiving what God is doing in you, that he is requiring you to do things according to his understanding and not yours, it will not happen. He is not going to bring judgment or deception or trickery or delusion. He is not going to hand me over to that. And do you hear what I'm saying right now? Right now, when I'm receiving letters from attorneys, from lenders, from banks, when people are so intrusively coming and knocking on my door to sell my home. And every day I'm receiving emails and voicemails and text messages from intrusive, evil sharks who prey on people's vulnerable situations. Do you hear the way I'm standing right now? Because you're going to see the fulfillment of God. You're going to see the glory of God. And you need to step into this, the offering that's being provided for you. You need to step into it. And you need to try to understand what it would take to bring yourself from great wealth to that position. After, by the way, having lived in poverty previously, having achieved wealth and thought, I'm never going to have to worry about money again. This is fantastic. All my life, having to worry about that. Never going to have to worry about it again. And then making a choice to give it up. Because when God tells you to do something, that's what you do. And no, it doesn't make sense, does it? And yet God said that it was easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than to do the things that I've done, the things that God has brought me to do. When he fulfills this, are you going to believe? Because the time is closing in, guys. Next year, the Antichrist will rise. Almost a year from where we're at right now, the Antichrist will rise. And so God has to do certain things in order to bring people low, in order to bring them in. And if you're not going to come in, if you're going to say, well, by the time he does whatever he does, you're going to say, oh, well, that was bound to happen, right? Just like when my daughter was giving birth to Jeremiah, people were like, oh, well, the baby had to come. Yeah, he did. He was going to come eventually. Maybe. There have been babies who haven't come and weren't healthy. And how many labors do you know that were a minute, where the contractions were a minute apart? After my daughter prayed, if you want me to have this baby at home, if you don't want me going to the hospital, you got to make a way. Guys, I'm not one, by the way, to say, be careful what you pray for. So that's not what I'm going to say, because I feel like that's used in such a way to say, don't pray for certain things because God's going to bring grief on you. I mean, if what you're praying for is in the will of God, then you should definitely pray for it. Nevertheless, listen to what I'm going to say. If God is already telling you this is what you need to do, and you still have a little doubt, try to lean in a little bit further, because having contractions 10 and a half hours, 1 minute apart, was really, really hard on my daughter. I know that it was really, really hard, and God bless her. I mean, that maybe that was what it seems like, that was what was needed in order to really prove to her that she needed to separate from medicine. But if there's any other way to do it where the onus is on you instead of placing the onus on God to prove to you, try to go that route. If it's possible, maybe in this situation it wasn't possible, but you should know that if you put the onus on God, it's probably going to be something that he's going to build in you, and it's going to bring some hardship. And I would say contractions 1 minute apart was hardship. That was hard. But God bless my daughter. She stood in faith like I've never seen anyone else stand. And she's continued to do so. And she has been the most amazing sister and trudging partner in what I've been going through, because I know that she has lived her faith. I'm so grateful that in God's grace and in his mercy that he's given me her, because everyone else has fled. No one else could handle it. And the weird thing is, I'm the one going through it. Don't let this offering be in vain. I became curious about this statement. If you do not stand firm in your faith, you will not stand at all. And ever so often I'll go and read a chapter in the Orthodox Jewish Bible, in that translation of the Bible, because it's just like, if you read different translations, be careful about the translation that you're reading. But if you read in different translations, it gives you like a different aspect. And sometimes the Holy Spirit will kind of move me in different ways to understand something in a way that is not necessarily expressed well in the NIV, for example. And or maybe there's a word. And in this situation, there's a word in Hebrew that I want to understand. And it's the word that's used for faith here in Isaiah 7:9. So, NIV, English version, the head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is only Remaliah's son. If you do not stand firm in your faith, you will not stand at all. Okay, Isaiah 7, verse 9 in the OJB. And the Rosh, the head of Ephraim, is Shamron, and the Rosh of Shamron is Ben Remalyahu. If you will not stand in Emunah, then you shall not stand at all. Okay, so Emunah obviously is a word for faith. And so I went and looked this up because I want to understand, and sometimes God will direct my attention to a particular word that has a concept that has a concept that is not well reflected in the English language. And I actually just Googled it thinking that it was going to come up in Strong's, but what I found in the AI overview I thought was very appropriate. So Emunah is a Hebrew word that is often translated as faith or belief in English. However, its meaning is closer to trust. In the Torah, Emunah is used to describe trust in God, loyalty and reliance on God. It's considered to be at the core of Judaism and is often described as the first of the 10 commandments. So first of the 10 commandments is do not put any gods before him. And so I sat here just kind of reflecting on that and the actual theme that God has been working out of me. The sin that I engaged in for so many years that led me to live the life that I did, that led me to idolize men, idolize money, education, career, and took me away from the life that I actually wanted to live. I wanted to live as a mother, though I wanted to be a mother all my life. If you asked me as a little girl what I wanted to be, that's what I would have told you. I want to be a mom. But then I was afraid. I was afraid when I was, 16 and pregnant, having had my daughter 2 days after my 17th birthday. I didn't know what I was doing. I was like, oh my gosh, there needs to be a way of feeding this child. There needs to be a way of, sending her to college, I guess. That's what the world says. So I went to work, and then I went to school, and then I got my doctorate, and then I built 3 businesses. Do you think my daughter cared about what was in my bank account? No. She wanted time with me. I didn't trust God. I didn't know that I could even trust him. I hadn't ever, I don't think in my life ever, had the ability to trust anyone. But even though I sinned ignorantly, even though I thought that the things that I was doing were good, and in the best interest of my daughter, God has taught me differently. And he says, if you sin ignorantly, you're going to receive a small lashing. If you sin with knowledge, you'll receive a large lashing. So I've received a smaller lashing, though it doesn't necessarily feel very small. And this is the thing that he's been teaching me, is that I never needed to go the route that I went, sell myself out in order to achieve according to the world. I never needed to do any of that because God was capable of taking care of me. And he was capable of taking care of my daughter. And it just so happens that he has. He's had his hand on her in spite of me and my stupid decisions. This has been a huge theme that he has needed to work through me, is this trust. Am I going to trust him? And God requires full trust, not double-minded trust, not half-hearted trust, full trust. And in order for you to even know what full trust is, because I couldn't possibly know what it is unless he brings me to a place of having to fully trust him, fully rely on him, and believe in who he has established himself to be, the name that he made for himself. I find this to be so interesting that there's this correlation between trust, this concept of Emunah, and the first commandment, because that is absolutely true. Anything that I would place before God, whether it's education, a job, a paycheck, government assistance. And the reason I say that is because a lot of people really depend on that. That's their God. That is an easy trap to fall into and then to answer to and then to hinge on. It is so hard for people who are receiving government assistance to get off of it. Because of what? Because of that dependency on that idol. It's so hard for us to come out of our worldly understanding, our worldly repertoires of what financial responsibility is, to purge that worldly understanding and relying on the work of our own hands or the work of our own carnality. And I've told you so many times before when I've taught you how to fast that everything needs to be removed that you've been placing between you and God. Every single thing. There cannot be anything. And so I go back to Isaiah 7, where it says, if you do not stand firm in your faith, You will not stand at all. If you do not trust him single-mindedly, fully reliant, with no gods between you and him, nothing else that you're placing your trust in, well, then that idolatry is going to be purged out, won't it? I mean, that's really being put through the fire to be in this situation right now. Those impurities are going to have to separate. There's no way that you can stand in a situation like this and not have those impurities burned out of you, is there? My offering is here right now as an example to you. Next year is going to begin that fiery trial, guys. And if you're not preparing right now, if you're not discerning, if you're not returning to God, you're not going to make it. Do I say that to scare you or to fearmonger you? I say it to instill a healthy fear of God. That if you are not leaning into the offerings that have been provided for you in the witnesses right now and in the sacrifices of the servants of God in the Bible, if you can't even lean into those, how are you going to lean into your own suffering? How are you going to understand? Because I'm going to tell you right now, I need those examples more than anything right now, because there are no examples here right now. And there's coming a time when you're going to remember what you are hearing me speak, when you're going to need to read the stories of these people in order to stand, because there aren't going to be very many people around you, if anyone, who's actually standing in this covenant, who actually understands it. Seems to me that everybody thinks this covenant's so easy. Listen to the statement and then compare it with what you're hearing me live out right now. Compare it with what Ahaz might have been thinking. I mean, God's telling it it's not going to happen. It's not going to take place. These people are threatening. They're just, smoldering firewood. Okay, so Ahaz hears God saying that. He feels him saying that. But what's in front of him are these two men who want to overtake him, who are trying to overtake Judah. You understand what this is like? So God told me, stay here. From the very beginning, when he first drew me to himself, he said, I set you up in this place. And then he told me, because I have 2 units on my property, when my tenant moved out of the front, I asked God, what do you want me to do? Weird people were popping up because of COVID. It was about that time. And he said, you're to save this place for your family. Okay. Well, and at that time, I had such even though I had wealth, I had such a poverty mentality that I was like, well, how am I going to make it? And then, I started to think about it and I was like, I can totally make it. At that time, that was before he had me give up my careers. And then he had me not sell the building that was going to pay for the rest of my time here. Okay, so you told me to stay here. You told me to stay here and possess the land. You told me that this is the place you set me up. You told me that front unit is for my family. But what I see coming against me are all of these powerful people of the world. Lenders, lawyers, realtors. You told me it will not take place. It will not happen. But are you going to do it? And the thing he says here is it will not take place. It will not happen, for the head of Aram is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is only Rezin. Within 65 years, Ephraim will be too shattered to be a people. The head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is only Remaliah's son. If you do not stand firm in your faith, you will not stand at all. That's the bottom line. If you don't trust me, you won't be able to stand. Here's the expectation. Believe in my words. It will not happen. If you don't stand firm in your faith, you're not going to stand at all. Which means he's not going to follow you around and keep giving you that affirmation and that confirmation. He's not going to keep doing that. He's not going to keep following you around and do the work of trusting him for you. It means you're going to have to go through all of the hard work of working this into your heart when things are desperate and they seem impossible. And you feel stupid. And everyone around you is either dropping off or they're just not saying anything because they're just waiting to see what happens. It's kind of crazy making, it's kind of crazy making when you're going through something like this. I will share that part with you because, some of the people who are have been closest to you don't say anything because they're not quite sure if you're crazy. Do you think I don't know that? I mean, really, I would wonder the same thing. I've said it to you before. I would wonder the same thing. Either she really is speaking from God or she's crazy. But see, if that's your thought, and that's a normal thought, and it should be your thought because you shouldn't just believe what I say at face value, you should go discern it with God. You should discern the fruit and test the spirit. You know why? Not because I say, but because the word says. All right, it's late here and I need to go to sleep, but I did want to share this with you. I wanted to share kind of I know I've kind of been here and there on the video bouncing around a bit, but these are the things that God is bringing up in me, and I know that it's important for me to share my testimony with you as I'm going through it, however messy it is, for the moment until he brings everything together. Please discern this with God.